Julia came to Scripps from Hawaii, like so many of the people that seem to be showing up here. Like a drifter experiment. We dispersed them, and then they came back. Anyway, Julia, she's going to talk about wave run-up and infragravity energy in the surf zone in the field, and in models too.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, hello everyone. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction, Uva. I am Julia Fiedler, and I'm going to talk to you guys today about waves, but probably not the kind of waves that you are familiar with. I study infragravity waves, or as my sister likes to call them, hidden math waves. And in the next few slides, I'm going to detail what infragravity waves and wave run-up are, how we study them, and why we care. So let's start things off by defining what wave run-up is. So here's a nice little graphic of the waves at the beach running up and running down. And wave run-up is a combination of a steady component of this and an oscillating component. So our steady component is wave setup. That's the super elevation of mean water level at the shoreline. And then our oscillating component is swash. And that's the time-varying excursion of water up and down the beach. And we measure that in the vertical here. The horizontal extent over which this goes is the swash zone. So all of these terms you're going to hear me talk about, hopefully not too long. I'll try not to be 3 hours long. Okay, so run-up influences sediment transport, cliff erosion, beach groundwater, and can lead to overtopping and structural damage. And this has important impacts for our coastline. Here in California, beach tourism generates about $38 billion of annual revenue per year. And in 2012, San Diego spent $30 million to add more sand and maintain the sand supply on the local beaches. Wave runoff can also have impacts on infrastructure near the beach. We have here our San Diego to LA rail that's right here at the coastline. It can also have impacts on our roads. Here's the 101 highway in Cardiff, and you can see that there's businesses and restaurants alongside the road that are getting flooded after this flooding event. And if you look in this picture, you see blue sunny skies. So this tells you that you don't need to have a hurricane-like event to get wave or to get coastal flooding. You just need the right combination of tides, water level anomalies, and then your wave run-up, which is coming from offshore wave conditions like storms far away. So completely understanding the wave run-up part of this coastal flooding puzzle is going to become more important as we head into a future of warming and rising seas. And one particular area where we're lacking is in extreme observations and field data from extreme conditions. So that's my thesis. The goal of my thesis was to explore the relationship between run-up here and the offshore conditions here for better coastal planning and management, especially in extreme conditions. Now this graphic is really simple. You just see this one wave rushing up to the beach. But as we saw in that first picture, the surf zone can be very jumbly. And in this picture, you will find the hidden math waves. So infragravity waves, what are those? So let's travel back in time to this graphic from Monk in 1950. And looking at the chart here, we see a spectrum of wave energy in the open ocean. Wave period is here on the x-axis. And as the wind blows over the water, you get these tiny little ripples, these capillary waves. And when the wind blows for longer amounts of time over greater periods or greater areas, these waves continue to grow. And eventually you get these ordinary gravity waves, or the waves that you see down at the pier today. These are their sea and swell waves. These waves in turn create infragravity waves through nonlinear interactions. Right. Okay, so in the open ocean, we have a lot of our wave energy here at the sea and swell waves, and then at the tidal frequencies. But as you get closer to the shoreline and in the surf zone, this can switch so that you get a lot more energy in the infragravity wave band here in this red line. And so how does that happen? What do you mean by nonlinear interactions? Well, imagine you're in deep water and you have this sinusoidal wave that's coming along and it's happening at a certain frequency. And then you have another wave that's very close in frequency. So we have a 10-second wave and a 9-second wave. And when these waves interact, we end up getting wave groups. And if you're a surfer, you're familiar with this phenomenon. You see waves coming in sets at the beach. Now, as these two waves combine through higher order interactions, we have this third wave that is formed. So this is our infragravity wave. This is happening at the difference frequencies of the two first sinusoidal waves. So if we have a 10-second wave and a 9-second wave, we end up getting this 100-second period wave, a very long period wave. And this is called a bound wave, in that it is tied to the sea and swell wave groups, exactly in antiphase. So if you have a depression here in your infragravity wave, this depression happens exactly where you have the higher sea and swell waves in this wave group. And as you get low waves in the wave group, your infragravity wave is elevated. But as we get closer to the shore, and as the water gets more shallow, this bound wave equilibrium theory can break down. So we'll see phase difference shifts between the IG wave and the sea and swell waves. And then we also see infragravity wave growth as our sea and swell waves get larger. As we get even more shallow, we can see things like infragravity wave dissipation. So this could be coming from infragravity wave breaking, could be coming from bottom friction, or maybe it's transferring that energy back into the short wave groups. Furthermore, you can get infragravity wave reflection. That's where the beach acts like a wall, and the infragravity waves come in and bounce back out. You can also have those waves become trapped by the slope of the beach, where they head along the coastline as edge waves. So there's a lot of infragravity energy coming around in this region, and this is the goal of trying to understand this is important for understanding runoff. So if none of that made any sense to you, you can think of these waves as very fast tides. So imagine you're standing at the water's edge and your feet are dry, and then 30 seconds later, you're up to your knee in water. That is an infragravity wave. So how this black curve becomes the red curve is somewhat of the basis for my thesis. So all in all, this thesis brought about 3 different papers, or 3 different chapters here. The first chapter is observations that we had at a field experiment, where I ask how infragravity energy evolves in extreme conditions and if there's a limit to wave runoff. And then in chapter 3 and chapter 4, I move on to modeling that wave energy and with the surf zone model. So in the first one, I ask if we can accurately predict runoff with the surf zone model. And then in the 4th chapter, I try to improve that boundary condition in the model. So there's a number of ways that we can measure wave runoff using a host of different instruments. First, here's our pressure sensor, and we can bury those in the sand, and those measure the weight of the water that is going over them at any period of time. These we're measuring at 1 or 2 hertz, depending on what experiment we had. And here we're looking at time on the x-axis, and hourly significant wave height in meters here on the y-axis, and that's the kind of information that you could get out of the pressure sensor. You can also have current meters, and those measure the velocity of the waves as well as the direction of them. So we can get a lot more information about what's happening in the surf zone and where these waves are going. But by far the coolest instrument that I use is the LiDAR. And the LiDAR is a relatively new field technique for measuring wave runoff. At the time when we put the LiDAR out, it had been well measured in the lab, but hadn't quite been tested so much in the field. So this is what we were doing. And the LiDAR is a laser. And it stands for light detection and ranging. And what it does, it can actually measure the shape of the water profile as it comes onto the beach. So let me explain sort of what that means. So the LiDAR itself is about the size of a chihuahua. And we put this on the top of a 30-foot tall scaffolding here at Cardiff Beach. And it would shoot out a pencil beam line scan, laser light, at 7 scans a second. So doing this at 7 hertz. And here's an example of the kind of data that you would get from this. So to orient you on this graph, we have our cross-shore distance here on the x-axis, and elevation on the y-axis, and our beach is here on the right. So this is this unchanging red thing. And this is data obtained in just 1 second. So we're looking at 7 scans as they go from blue to red, and you can see the face of the wave as it heads on shore. And for you wave nerds out there, which most of you are, you can actually see that the speed of the wave is changing as we get into shallower water. All right, so if we were looking at this from bird's eye view and just looking at this line scan, each second of this line scan in time, and we stack them up all on top of each other, we could get something called a time stack. So again, here we're looking at cross-shore distance on our x-axis, and we have time in the vertical. So this is going from 0 to 200 seconds. And we're looking at vertical elevation. The coloring here is deviation from the mean. So this red color means we have higher water. And to think about how to read this plot, we can track the crest of the wave at this red color here, and watch as it comes onshore in time, runs up the beach, and then runs back down. And then you have a wave immediately following that, running up and running down. So that is here, our swash zone, and these are all individual run-up events. Now, I want to contrast that with the industry standard for measuring wave run-up, which is the Argus camera here. And the Argus camera measures pixel intensity. So it's looking at the very bright spots on the wave. So it's probably looking at wave foam, the stuff on the crest of the wave, as it heads on shore. So this is somewhat more of an eyeball method here. It's not, so the LiDAR, as opposed to the Argus, is a quantitative measurement. So you can actually assign a depth value or an elevation value to each data point that you see with the LiDAR, as opposed to the Argus. Another great thing about the LiDAR is that you can scan things at night. So on this, you're missing out about half your data. So if we're going to track the run-up, we can pick an arbitrary, not an arbitrary, we can pick a depth for the run-up depth. And let's say we want to pick 10 centimeters off of the sand, so 10 centimeters of water depth. And we can track that in time. So we're going to follow that 10 centimeters as it goes up and down the beach here. And again, let me explain it to you on this graphic. We're watching the 10 centimeter depth going up and down and measuring this in the vertical. So out of this, we can get a run-up excursion time series. So here's time on our x-axis, and then our elevation here on the y-axis. The mean of this is going to be our setup. That's the steady part of wave run-up, and that's elevated above the still water level. Out of that, we can get a run-up spectrum, energy versus frequency. This is similar to what you would have if you were looking at wave heights in the ocean. And we can divide that up into our infragravity band and our incident band, or C-swell band, or our ordinary gravity waves. And these are happening at 4 to 25 second periods, and these are at 25 to 200 second periods. So out of this, we can get a significant swash height, kind of like significant wave height, actually exactly the same way, and divide that up into infragravity swash and incident swash. So infragravity swash will be summed over these frequencies, and incident swash is summed over these frequencies. So one of the outstanding questions is what happens in extreme conditions? So in 2011, a paper came out of an experiment in France, where they saw waves in the deep water at about 6.5 meters of wave height. And this is extreme for that area. And so if we look at deep water wave height here on the x-axis, and we're looking at incident swash here on the y-axis, again, incident swash is the waves that we can see running up and down the beach, 4 to 25 second period. Notice that this is just a linear trend line. So as the waves get bigger offshore, so does your swash. That makes sense. But now let's look at the infragravity swash. First off, notice that our infragravity swash is bigger than our incident swash, but then it's not linear. So for the first part of this, in our shorter deep water wave heights, we have this linear trend. But then something is happening out here at the extreme end of this. And it's a question of, what is that? Do we have enough observations to actually say that this is some sort of hyperbolic tangent fit to our data. Is there a limit to wave runup? So to understand this better, we embarked on 2 field campaigns to measure runup accurately using the new field technique with the LiDAR. And we first tested it at Cardiff Beach in 2012, just after they had added a bunch of sand to the beach here in a beach nourishment project. So you can see that scaffolding here, a 30-foot tall scaffolding. And then we headed north to Agate Beach, Oregon, land of big waves. So now we start chapter 2. How does intergravity energy evolve during extreme conditions, and is there a limit to wave runup? I'm going to breeze over this chapter and focus mostly on the observations that we got. But first off, I'll explain to you what Agate Beach, what our transect was. So if we're looking at cross-shore distance here on the x-axis and vertical elevation here on the y-axis, we're at Agate Beach, which experiences a lot of large waves coming from the Pacific Northwest. And because we wanted to capture what was happening all across the surf zone, we instrumented the heck out of this beach. So in total, we had 18 buried pressure sensors here in the plus lines, and then we had a total of 8 pressure and current meters, not all of which are shown on the plot. Then we had a LiDAR that was mounted on a cliff in the backshore at x = 0 that was measuring the wave runup. And the tidal swing at Agate is about 2.5 meters. And that translates on this beach to about 250 meters of exposed beach during any given tidal cycle. So to give you an idea of what that is, the script here is 300 meters. So now imagine that all of script here becomes exposed during a tidal cycle. So that tells you that this beach is super flat. Do not be confused by this axis ratio. We're looking at 1.5 kilometers here. Now we're looking at wave heights that we observed at Agate Beach. We're looking at the wave height at an offshore buoy, and then wave height for infragravity wave heights across the array. And first I want to point out that we came for big waves and we got them. Hooray. So here we got offshore wave heights at about 7.5 meters. So for those of you that do not speak meters, this is about 25 feet. I think all of you speak meters, maybe except for my parents. So shout out to my parents. And let's go back to that picture that I showed in the very beginning. Here's Kent at PUV4 here. I think this might have been low tide. And this is not even our highest wave day, even though these waves look super crazy in the background. So this is, we did get our large wave observations, which is great. Now I'm looking at the bottom plot. We're looking at infragravity wave height at PUV8. Here, our furthest offshore sensor in the purple, and then infragravity wave height at the shoreline in green. And for the most part of this experiment, we have the IG wave behaves exactly as you would expect it to across the surf zone. That is, the purple line is below the green line, and the infragravity wave is growing as it heads onshore. But during the very large wave conditions, this is slightly reversed, or the infragravity wave remains constant. And here's an example of what that looks like in the cross shore. So now we're comparing a small wave day to a large wave day, and these waves are measured here at PUV8. And we're looking at the sea and swell wave height, again, the waves that you can see, the ordinary gravity waves, and then our infragravity waves here on the bottom panel. So for the small wave days, maybe there's some slight shoaling as we head across the array, and then we see this decrease in wave height as the waves enter the surf zone. And for the infragravity waves, we see them grow as we head on shore. This is the normal situation, what you would expect. But for large wave days, basically our entire array was in the surf zone. So we're looking at things in 10 meters water depth, and that is where the surf zone starts. So again, very large wave observations. And the infragravity wave remains relatively constant across the surf zone, maybe some slight growth here, and then we see this dissipation as we get towards the shallower water. So this is not looking at run-up. We came to look at run-up. and we got runoff. So the LiDAR captures several large runoff events. Here we're looking at a time stack again. So we have our cross-shore distance on the x-axis here, and we're looking at 8 meters in time on the y-axis. And the coloration here is deviation from the mean, so you can think of this as the water level above the sand. And like I said, with the LiDAR, we can pick certain elevations over which we can track wave runoff. So if we pick a 20 centimeter depth and track that, that's here in the black line, versus a 10 centimeter depth in the white line, we'll get slightly different measurements of what wave runoff is. And then this purple line is what would happen if we were using the Argus camera. So we do see that wave runoff can be as much as about 150 meters in the course of maybe 30 seconds. So imagine you see a wave, a football field and half away from you, and 30 seconds later it's at your feet. That tells you that runoff can be very important, and we need to understand it. So let's compare the LiDAR with the pressure sensors that we have buried here, P11 and P06. And now we're looking at vertical elevation here on the x-axis, and the same amount of time here on the y-axis. And in green, we have our pressure sensor, and in blue, we have our LiDAR. And we can see that they match very well. So this means that the LiDAR was ground truthed very well to the instruments that we had out at the beach. And you can even notice the wave runoff events as they go up the beach, right? This is here, measuring this little bump in time as the wave passed over it. Okay, so out of this line, we can again get our runoff excursion time series and our significant infragravity wave swash and incident swash. And from those guys, we can get a value for the highest 2% of all runoff excursions. So this is a combination of both setup and swash here, following the equation from Stockton 2006, which is a commonly used equation for looking at wave runoff. And if we compare this, our extreme runoff value here to our offshore forcing, which is a combination of wave height and wavelength in deep water. And we're looking at small waves here on the left-hand side of this plot, and then large waves here on the right-hand side. And we're tracking, again, the 10 centimeter line or the 20 centimeter line for depth. You'll notice that it seems like this is just a linear trend line. That is, as the offshore forcing gets larger, so does our extreme runoff, which tells you we did not observe any sort of limit to wave runoff at this beach. So each dot here represents 1 hour of data, 1 hour of data observed with the LiDAR. Okay, so for chapter 2, we saw that we got field observations of large waves across the surf zone, and that the LiDAR accurately tracked the runoff count depth. And we didn't find any infragravity wave runoff saturation. On chapter 3, I asked if we can accurately predict this with a 1D model. So if our goal is to get an accurate prediction of wave runoff, and we want a fast and accurate method for a prediction, we can choose between using a parameterization or a surf zone model. Now this is a picture of Cardiff Beach again, and notice that there is valuable infrastructure right adjacent to the beach. We have the 101 highway here, we have the train tracks here, there's a little bit of riprap, rocks and stuff that are blocking the highway. And if you're a coastal manager, you want to know the error associated with either of these. You want to reduce the error. So sometimes the error associated with using this parameterization can be significant. And in some cases, if you have the difference of wave runoff between, let's say there's an error of 20 centimeters, this can be a difference between significant or no street flooding at all. So the goal is reducing that error. And we want to know, should we parameterize or model this? So if we're going to parameterize, we need to know 3 things: height and the deep water wave lengths. And from those, we can plug them into this global parameterization that is a function of these 3 parameters, or 2, depending on the kind of beach you have, with some sort of constant in front of them. And this again is from Stockton 2006, which is a commonly used parameterization. So out of this, we can get our extreme runoff. This is the answer that we see. But if we're going to model it, we need to know a little bit more information. The previous one, we had to know three things here, right? The beach slope, the wave height, and the wavelength. And if we model, we need to know things like the 1D wave spectrum offshore, as well as the bathymetry of the beach that we're modeling. From those, we can plug it into a surf zone model. And out of that, again, we get our run-up time series, where we can extract both the RT% value, but then also look at the physics of what's going on in the surf zone. So understanding the shape of the waves or the fluxes in the energy as we head on shore. So to summarize here, if we parameterize, this is super fast and super simple because you only need to know three things. But you can get errors because sometimes beaches are not just one slope, right? We have unique bathymetry, we have sandbars and concave beaches. If we're using a model, this can be relatively fast. The model that I ran took about 30 minutes to get 1 hour's worth of data. And this is a little bit more accurate than if you parameterize, but you do need to know the bathymetry. So that's where this model comes from, SWASH 1D, which stands for Simulating Waves Till Shore. So SWASH 1D, this is a 1D non-hydrostatic phase resolving model. That is, we can see what the short waves are doing in relation to what the gravity waves are doing. I used it with 2 vertical terrain following layers. You can use more. And because I used only 2 layers, the wave breaking was approximated with this hydrostatic front. I used variable cross-grid spacing to detail the SWASH zone. So as we got closer to shore, cross-grid spacing got smaller. And I did it in 1 hour runs. And the input to the model mimicked a offshore sea swell spectrum, assuming shore normal waves. So this is the kind of information you would get if you had, say, a buoy with limited infragravity wave observations or infragravity observations that you didn't trust. And the model then takes your sea and swell information only, and then adds a bound wave to that. So it assumes that all infragravity energy that's in the model is exactly according to this equilibrium theory, where we're in antiphase with the wave groups. And I was looking at Cardiff and Agate Beach, and for both of them I used the default friction. That is, there was no tuning for this model because I wanted it to be global for both different beaches. So we had 2 field sites. We had Agate Beach and we have Cardiff Beach. And here's the bathymetry of both on the same scale, just to give you a comparison of how different Cardiff was to Agate. And over the course of the experiment, the beach did change because the sand was moving around after that recent beach enrichment. So we got a range of different beach slopes to enter into our model and parameterizations. We saw a whole bunch of different frequencies over the course of the experiment and a bunch of different wavelengths. So this is on the same scale here. It just goes to show you that at Cardiff Beach, we did not see very large waves. So these dotted lines here are the test cases that I chose to use. There were 17 at Agate Beach and 11 at Cardiff, and they were chosen to represent a range of conditions at both beaches. So if we look at the surf zone model data comparison, on our left we have Agate Beach, and on our right we have Cardiff Beach. And here we're just looking at the incident wave height, that is, again, sea swell wave height, ordinary gravity waves. And we're comparing our pressure sensor data here in the circles to the SWASH in the solid line, and SWASH model here in solid line. And notice that it performs incredibly well for the sea and swell wave heights. Now let's skip to the setup as well, and it also performs well for both beaches, again, using the same default friction, no tuning. And this is probably because we know the bathymetry for both of these beaches. Now, if we look at the infragravity wave height, it doesn't perform quite as well, but that can also be because we're looking at a different scale here. Now, if we were to compare all these circles with the model here and compare them across the surf zone for all the test cases that we did, we can look at the modeled incident wave height versus the observed wave height. And the coloration here is depth. So as we get to these blue colors, we're in deeper water. And for the most part, this is a one-to-one match. The model performs incredibly well for the seeds of wavelengths. The infragravity waves are another story. You might have noticed in the previous plot, which I skipped over, there's something funky here happening at the boundary. And you think that is because we are using this bound wave condition, which assumes, again, that all the infragravity energy is bound to these seed swell wave groups. So you'll notice that there is a larger misfit here in the blue colors where there's deeper water in the offshore. And we found that if we change the boundary condition to include observations from our pressure data, that we were able to get this to match slightly better. But it didn't matter whether we used this model or the previous one, the results for runup still came out to be relatively the same. So here's the results for runup. Okay, now we're looking at infragravity swash, incident swash, setup, that's the steady part again, and then the combination of all of these with our R2% extreme value. And for all of these cases, the model versus the observed, we see incredibly good matching. So the observations here are from the LiDAR, and what the LiDAR allows us to do is make this one-to-one comparison. We can pick a depth at which we're going to track runoff with the LiDAR observations, and we can pick that same depth in the model. So we are comparing apples to apples. And note that, again, we're using the same default friction and physics for both beaches, and we still get the same result. So if we're looking at the just the R2% here, let's zoom in on this. We find that there's a 14 centimeter root mean square error, which is incredibly small and great. It's good. So again, both Cardiff and Agate do well, even though we're using the default parameters here. If we compare that to a parameterization using the Stockton parameterization, if we don't adjust those constants, we get a much bigger error and a large misfit here. So we would say in this case, it is better to use the model. So for the key points in chapter 3, the LiDAR data allowed a one-to-one comparison, apples to apples, with the swash model, and the run-up was well modeled using the default parameters, despite having this flawed bound wave. So in chapter 4, we go about trying to fix what's happening at the boundary. So what is the role of the offshore boundary condition in surf zone model? We got run-up, but we don't really know why that worked. So the last chapter is the first step in figuring out why the model looks so good, and the second part of that will be my postdoctoral work. So the question is, what's the ideal infragravity input at the offshore boundary? We can use a wave buoy, like you would commonly use if you're going to use a surf zone model. You have your information from a wave buoy, you stick it into a more regional model like SWAN, and then that goes into your surf zone model. And then we can have observations, which we were lucky enough to have at Agate Beach and Cardiff Beach, where you have a pressure sensor or a current meter and get information like water level or water level and velocity. And so why would you necessarily want to know this? Well, if you want to study the physics of surf zone and run-up and understand the shape of the waves or other energy fluxes, it's important to get this stuff right. In addition, you need to know this stuff for sediment transport. The wave shape and the higher order moments coming out of this model can lend itself well into sediment transport models. If you want to know where the sand is going, you need to know what the waves are doing. So in total, we've tested 6 different inputs to the model. And up here, we have 4 different inputs that we used that involve observations from the pressure sensor or the PUVs, the pressure velocity sensor. And from left to right, we're looking at increasing amounts of infragravity observations. So down here, we're not including infragravity observations and let the model do it for us. So the bound wave, again, was the condition that we used in the previous chapter. Again, assuming that all infragravity energy is exactly in antiphase to these C and slow wave groups. And you can also assume here, EIG equals 0, that we have absolutely no infragravity energy. And these two conditions here are more commonly used in surface zone modeling, and I'm going to focus on these as we head towards the rest of this chapter. So we tested this with observations of shoreward propagating wave height, shoreward energy flux, and nonlinear moments. I'm only going to discuss the wave height and the nonlinear moments, and if you just tuned out when I said nonlinear moments, don't worry, I'm going to talk about it in terms of wave shape. So, if we're looking at shoreward propagating wave height, and we have our sea and swell waves, our incident waves here on the y-axis, and then our cross-shore distance at Agate Beach here with our 6 different models, you might notice that it doesn't really matter what input you put into the model. We have agreement on all fronts, no matter what we have out here at P8. So this is a case of moderate wave height and high wave height here. Now, if we look at the infragravity waves, pay close attention to the red line and the blue line. This is assuming no infragravity energy, and this is assuming all infragravity energy is bound. We can get large misfits, especially in high wave conditions, to the data. So both of these boundaries perform poorly in high energy conditions, and these are the boundaries that are most commonly used currently in surface zone modeling. So if we're looking at nonlinear moments, I will describe it now in terms of wave shape. So in the offshore, traditionally you'll have a sinusoidal wave. As we get towards shallow water, those waves become more peaky and skewed. And then as they start breaking, they'll become asymmetric and soft in shape. And that is described partly by this expression here, which is skewness of just our sea swell wave groups, all interacting, or our sea swell all interacting with itself. Now we can also look at the interaction of the IG wave with the sea swell wave group, and here skewness is less than 0 when we have this bound wave offshore. Again, we have a depression here with the highest waves of the sea swell wave group, but our skew can become positive as we head onshore. And note here that the IG wave is elevated where you have the high parts of the wave group. So what does that mean? As we head further onshore, we can have sea and swell waves riding on top of an infragravity wave, and that can make it run bigger. So we can describe this all in terms, or partly in terms of wave skewness. So if we look at this case of high waves at Agate Beach, and we're comparing our observations here in the dots to our different models. For the green and the purple models, these are where we include infragravity information into the model. And again, here we assume no infragravity energy, and here we assume that all IG energy is bound. Then, as we follow this along, as we head closer to shore, you see the wave shape changing, or the phase between the IG wave and the sea swell wave group changing. But we get this large misfit between the IG with 0 or the bound wave input. And yet something is happening over here in the shallower water where all these models tend to converge. And that would be the subject of my postdoctoral studies. We want to know why that's happening. Because again, in the previous paper we saw no matter what boundary we use, the run-up still gave us the same answer. So why is this happening? What is going on in the very shallow waters of the surf zone? This is cut off here at 0.75 meters or thereabouts. So this, we're not in the swash zone yet. So again, if we ask the question what the ideal infragravity input is at the offshore boundary, it really depends on the question that you're trying to answer. If you only want to know what your run-up is going to do, and you want to know your bulk wave runoff statistics, it's fine enough, apparently, to use the bound wave boundary, which is good news if you're a surface modeler and using this for a long time. But if you want to know things like the surface zone physics or the runoff physics, or you want to understand where the sand is going, it's better to have observations. And so, in the words of my advisor, field data rules. Okay, so key points in chapter 4, we saw that the flawed boundary was improved with the addition of the gravity observations, and that all the tested models tended towards collapsing in the inner surface zone. And again, why do we care about this? Well, we care about understanding not only how high the water is going to get here at the coastline, but we want to know why it's doing it. So in chapter 2, we saw field observations of large waves across the surf zone using this novel technique of the LiDAR, which accurately tracked the run-up on the depth. And then we did not see any sort of infragravity run-up saturation. In chapter 3, we saw that the LiDAR data allowed for this one-to-one comparison with the swash model, and that run-up was well modeled with the default parameters, despite having this flawed boundary. And in chapter 4, we fixed that flawed boundary by including infragravity observations, but we also found that the tested models collapsed towards this common solution in the inner surface zone. And again, that is going to be a subject of future study. So now is the point at which I breathe and we do some thinkies before we get to questions. So first off, I would like to thank my advisor, Lisa, for helping me through this 7-year journey that really had chapters 5 and 6, which are sitting out there on the whatever that's called. And yeah, he was always available by email when I had to work remotely. And this guy has a serious dedication to work, which is a great inspiration. It's been a great inspiration. I also need to have a special shout out to the field crew. For without these guys, none of this would have been possible. They produce great quality instruments, and they do it while having fun. And I am so grateful for the work that you guys do. And I'd also like to thank my committee, Paul, Sarah, Gino, and Jerry. And my co-authors, Kate Brody and Peter Smith. Kate Brody, the LiDAR guru, Peter, the mono guru, and Michelle for organizing all logistics for everything. The Army Corps of Engineers, and the grad office, and all of my friends along the way. You guys have helped me out a lot, and great inspiration on kind of things. And thank you very much to my family. Those guys. And questions. So if you do have a secret beach, it's probably makes sense that you can't see anyone around. Maybe all that went into the setup, and we're just looking at a swatch there, not a little R2%. That's one of the reasons, possibly why. Also, at Agate, maybe you just didn't get big enough waves, and we'll have to go again.
In any of these places, some of that wave energy can go into long-short currents.
Yes.
Is that a budgeting worry here? Could that be the cause of the saturation in gravity?
It is entirely possible for this entire thesis. I pretend that the surface zone is one of them. So I ignored one of those. We picked times when the waves were mostly short normal to test against the model. So these other times you would have to use the correct understanding or have observations off the array. We don't have one array.
How does swash dissipate the waves?
Yeah. Well, we have, let's watch this real quick. Well, we've got things, it might be going into, they have a bottom friction component, and it might go into that. There could also be some other mechanisms, like with hydrostatic current approximation. That is, yeah, the hydrostatic current approximation momentarily assumes that we have a dam break kind of problem as we head on shore. And so that also be yeah.
What do you think if you had a perfectly monochromatic swell wave coming into the water, would you still see different gravity waves?
If it was perfectly monochromatic, I would assume that you would.
Well, I was just wondering whether the tendency of waves to want to reach might be a nonlinear part of this whole thing.
Yes, I mean, yeah, it's all part of the interaction. Yes.
Rather than, for example, just two storms. Two sources.
True, right. If everything is traveling at different speeds, you're going to get much secular processes that are happening.
Did any of your models could you put in a monochromatic source?
You could, you did not.
I don't know if this thing is unstable with a monochromatic incident wave, wave roots in electrification. I don't know. We never see a monochromatic wave plane. That means every wave is exactly the same as the one before. And it's only one frequency, but in pure tone. You never, ever see that in the ocean. The first question is, maybe there's a reason for that. Yeah.
So you can ask a question.
We just consider it a balance condition.
So if you were a coastal manager, I would think you would face someone that you would like to use the model that you could to make predictions. The model required beach slope. And at least around here, I'm sitting around a lot of places, our beaches evolve along over the winter. So how easy is it to for something like what's the minimum that you need to know a beach slope is changing? So is that how much would that be able to do that for someone
Yeah, I think for practical predictions, you would probably want to know some sort of an average profile over time. So you would have like your wind profile and your summer profile. A lot of what Bonnie's work does, like, modeling how the beach, or she used to model how the beach rock back and forth. So that could be used. There's other also more remote methods of looking at the chemistry that are up and coming, like sea mapping, which is used by the artist cameras. So it just looks at how, basically, if you average in time what the different colors are in the beach, and then you can figure that there's a sandbar in that region. So extrapolate what's happening with the future. But yeah, so it's more of an incorporation of other bathymetric models as well. Yeah.
At the point where all the models tend to converge in the IG prediction,
Yeah.
can you kind of characterize what's happening with the swell there? Is that we're looking out? Can you kind of, is that inside the break zone?
It's inside the break zone. But other than that, I'm not sure I can explain it. I can give you a picture. And actually, we only have this one picture here of the, right now for this view. But yeah, I mean, I would say that it's converging both with the scene swell and also with interactions with the so that is again the function or the what I'll be doing for the next year.
Julie, just because we're on this, can I ask, where is, you also had a plot of significant incident wave height and infragravity wave height aligned with this behind. Where is the surf zone stuff? Where's the outer limit of the surf zone?
So in this one, there's this tiny gray bar here on the far left-hand side of this plot. That is where our surf zone starts.
So you're initiating this
We're
model with
initiating
either
it in the surf
EIG
zone.
is equal to 0 or bound wave
Yep.
when you're actually in the surf zone.
Yeah, which tells you during extreme conditions, using a boundary or using a model with this boundary is probably not going to work well for you.
That
But we're
seems
looking at
absurd.
extreme
It's
conditions.
done daily around the world in operational logs.
I get that. But I mean, if you had taken this model domain and extended it another kilometer offshore or something like that, and then initialized with the EIG 0 or bound one, then presumably
Presumably
it
you
would
would
be
get better.
it would be relatively kosher.
Yeah, and the bound wave does actually perform really well when the waves are very low. So that tells you that there is something to using the bound wave condition. But again, we're looking for these extreme waves, right? And so what are you going to do in this situation? And I also didn't have observations beyond this point, so that's where we had to start.
I get all that. I get all that.
Yeah.
So you show that the phasing of the bound wave changes from offshore to onshore to change skewness. Why does that phasing change? Just don't know
I would say that the speed of the infragravity wave is at a different, it's experiencing different like bottom friction as it goes onshore. That would be one of the reasons that the phase is changing.
But that always sort of times out to where they become in phase to the surf zone.
Not necessarily. So this is like a really,
Yeah.
really generalized idea of what is happening again, because it's not like we see the wave groups when we get to like fully jumbled surf zone, right? It's not this perfect situation. So there's a whole bunch of craziness happening with the IG. That is a future study.
I have two questions. So one is it difficult to kind of observe waves using LiDAR? Because waves is not that simple. So there's something like reflecting waves and like, so is it easy? And the second thing is that, so what's the demerit of using LiDAR in comparison to just using conventional like sensors with what kind of parameters you can't get with LiDAR?
Sure. So the first question that you have is it easy to use a LiDAR? I love that question. No, it's not easy. Especially so at Cardiff in the beginning when we were setting things up, especially in low wave conditions, you have very glassy waves, and the LiDAR will hit the waves and bounce off of it, and you can't get any feedback or information for what's happening when you have like beautiful, perfect smell. So in addition to that, at Aggie Beach, we have things like rain and fog and stuff, which would cloud the information that you're getting from the LiDAR. So there's a lot of quality control that goes into getting the data out of it, which I sort of glossed over. Hey, look, here's the waves.
I don't know that Julie conveyed the craziness of what was actually done. What was the range that you were shining that LiDAR and scanning at 7 hertz?
Yeah, we're looking over the course of maybe 2.5 football fields from the
Okay,
LiDAR.
stand
itself.
2.5 football fields away. Point of being, know exactly, not maybe, but know where it's pointing within this much, and then scan it at 7 hertz in the rain and fog. Is that easy? Dios mío, no. It took 8 flying monkeys and 2 months to squeeze out these 18 hours of data. Julia didn't convey. We only got LiDAR when it wasn't rainy and foggy and windy all at the same time, which left about 20% of the data. So it's not easy, no.
Okay, and the second part of the second part of the question is what kind of information we can get out of it, and that is, again, if you're looking at wave shape, that's important. But with the pressure sensors and the current meters, let's say we have these 4 points of observation, but with the LiDAR, we can get stuff that's, and this is an exaggeration here, but if we're looking at Cardiff Beach, for example, where we had much closer sensors and the LiDAR itself was closer, you can only guess as to what's happening between one pressure sensor and another pressure sensor, but you can get a continuous answer for what's happening with the LiDAR. And so in that way, it's incredibly helpful. If you're looking for waves.
I have one question about the models, the web model. So why why not use this web model? What are the differences?
Why not?
What's the reason why not use this one? If you use the SWAM model, you get the same kind of result or not?
When you say SWAM model, do you mean something like XSpeech?
No, the SWAM.
Oh, SWAM model. Okay, so the SWAM model, that is, SWAM model, you say wave breaking happens and you give it like one parameter, right? It happens at this certain depth and then we have a certain zone, right? But what the SWASH model is doing is that it's solving all the equations in detail, what is happening in the very near shore. So I would say the SWASH model makes a lot of approximations as you get closer to shore. And I know I did not compare the SWASH model with the SWAN model for what's going on in the surf zone. But again, you have to choose the wave breaking with just one parameter, which to me seems not good. Yeah.
Are edge waves important here at all? I mean, you seem like we kind of ignore them.
You seem like you can kind of sure. So we did everything in 1D, right? And we chose the times to be perfectly shore normal, all our ways to be shore normal to line it up with this model. But if you're doing things in 2D, yes, edge waves become incredibly important. And edge waves can also change what's going on with the free infragravity energy as it's sort of floating around in the surf zone. So we found that to be slightly a problem at Cardiff Beach, where our furthest offshore sensor was probably within the area where you would see edge waves. So we did see a lot of free energy floating around. So yes, they are important. Yeah.
I'm going to go back to that point that Bob brought up. So this x-axis is the total wave. And you said that the bound energy boundary condition works better in the smaller waves. Is that just because then you have a shorter surf zone and outside the surf zone the energy actually is bound?
That could be reason for it. Let me see if I can find a graph for you. But if we're just going to compare, let's say, this moderate wave height day versus this large wave day, then we're looking at here the surf zone starts at 800 meters, and here basically all of this is in the surf zone. The bound wave does perform pretty well in this situation, and yeah, it's possible that just because the surf zone is short, that's what you get. Maybe. Although to say that the bound wave condition actually in the real condition might be the gross overestimation of what's actually happening. It's just theory. And so this isn't actually what the ocean is.
Okay, if there's no more questions, everybody please leave and the committee will toss it down to the At noon, there will be food at Surfside. Yes, Surfside. Thank you.